It's a Tuesday night. You're sitting on the edge of your bed in the apartment you've been renting for 3 years, laptop open, scrolling through Zillow for the 4th time this week. There's a 2-bedroom about 15 minutes from where you work. The photos are decent. The kitchen needs work. The mortgage calculator on the listing says your monthly payment would be around $3,400, and your current rent is $2,200. You close the laptop. You open it again. You do the math one more time, because surely you're missing something. Your parents bought their first house when they were younger than you are now. Every podcast, every coworker, every family dinner tells you that renting is throwing money away. But every time you run the numbers tell you the opposite. You sit there in the blue glow of the screen, trying to figure out which voice to trust, the cultural one or the calculator. Here's the thing nobody is saying out loud. In 2026, the rules everyone is still quoting at you were written for a market that no longer exists. Welcome to Rocket Finance. In the next few minutes, we're going to run the actual math on renting versus buying right now. Not the math your uncle ran in 1998. The math that applies to you in this market with these rates and these prices. If you've ever felt like the standard advice doesn't match what your bank account is telling you, stick around. Hit subscribe if you want more of this. We do this every week, and the algorithm only shows it to people who tell it to. So let's start with the structural piece, because this part isn't your fault and it matters that you understand that. For most of the post-war era, the math of home ownership genuinely worked for most middle-class families. Mortgage rates were manageable, home prices grew roughly in line with incomes, and the mortgage interest deduction tipped the scales toward buying. The advice, buy a house, build equity, retire, wasn't a scam. It described reality. That reality broke. Mortgage rates sat near historic lows for years and then more than doubled. Home prices, according to the Federal Reserve's data and Zillow's tracking, are roughly 33% higher than they were at the start of 2021. Property taxes climbed. Homeowners' insurance, especially in states exposed to weather events, has spiked. The Bureau of Labor Statistics reported insurance costs up nearly 7% year-over-year in January. And the 2017 tax law changes quietly reduced the value of the mortgage interest deduction for a lot of middle-income buyers. Nobody sat down and decided to make buying unaffordable. It's the cumulative result of policy choices, monetary policy, and a housing supply problem that lawmakers are still arguing about. You walked into a system that shifted under your feet, and then a real estate industry whose entire business model depends on transactions kept telling you the old rules still apply. Now let's get into the numbers, because this is where it stops being abstract. According to Construction Coverage's 2026 analysis using Zillow and census data, the national median monthly mortgage payment is now about 20% higher than the median rent. Out of 838 U.S. cities they looked at, only 95 are currently cheaper to buy in than to rent. Empower's analysis of the 50 largest metros found buying cheaper in 23 of them and renting cheaper in 27. So the answer to, is it cheaper to rent or buy, is genuinely, it depends on your zip code, and the odds are not in buying's favor. Take a concrete case. You're 31. You work as a marketing manager in Denver. You make about $95,000, and you have $80,000 saved. You're looking at a $400,000 condo. With 20% down at a 6.5% mortgage rate, your principal and interest comes out around $2,020 a month. Add property taxes, homeowners insurance, the 1 to 2% of home value per year that goes to maintenance and repairs, and HOA fees, and your true monthly cost lands somewhere between $3,200 and $3,600. A comparable rental in your neighborhood runs $2,200 to $2,500. That's a gap of roughly $1,000 to $1,400 a month, every month, that you're paying for the privilege of owning. Now, the standard rebuttal is, yeah, but you're building equity. And you are. But here's what nobody tells you about equity in year one. On a 30-year mortgage at 6.5%, roughly 75% of your early payments go to interest, not principal. On a $320,000 loan, you'll pay over $20,000 in the first year and add about $5,500 to your equity through principal paydown. The rest of your equity growth has to come from appreciation, and if your home appreciates at the long-run national average of 3 to 4%, that's another $12,000 to $16,000 a year on a $400,000 home. Sounds good. Until you remember you're paying $12,000 to $15,000 more per year to own than to rent. The equity is mostly just giving you back what the cost premium took. Here's where it gets interesting. Imagine you're 28, a software engineer in Austin, making $110,000, and you've got about $90,000 saved. You decide to rent for $2,300 instead of buying a place that would cost you $3,400 all in. You take that $100 monthly difference and put it into a broad market index fund. At an average 8% annual return, over 15 years, that's roughly $200,000 in liquid wealth. Not locked in drywall, not requiring a 6% agent commission to access. Just there. And speaking of that commission, transaction costs on a home sale typically run 6 to 8% of the sale price between agent fees, closing costs, and transfer taxes. On a $400,000 home, that's $24,000 to $32,000 evaporating the day you sell. If you don't stay in the home long enough to outrun those costs, you've effectively paid the real estate industry a 5-figure fee to babysit your money for a few years. This is why the duration question matters so much. If you're going to stay less than 5 years, the math is almost always rent. Transaction costs alone will eat any equity you build. 5 to 7 years. Run the numbers carefully. Beyond 7 to 10 years, buying generally starts to win because you've had time to amortize the upfront costs and accumulate real principal. There's a useful shortcut here called the price-to-rent ratio. You take the home price and divide it by the annual rent for a comparable property. Below 15, buying is generally favorable. Between 15 and 20, it depends. Above 20, renting is almost certainly the better financial move. A lot of coastal and major metro markets, Los Angeles, San Francisco, Seattle, parts of the New York metro, currently sit above 25. Meanwhile, places like Detroit, Cleveland, and pockets of Alabama, Georgia, and Texas still favor buyers, sometimes by 40 to 60%. Geography is doing most of the work in this decision. So if the math is this clear, why do so many smart people still buy at the wrong time? This is the psychological layer, and it comes down to something behavioral economists call anchoring to the monthly payment. When you look at a house, your brain locks onto one number, the mortgage payment. You compare it to your rent. If they're close, your brain says, sure, this works. What your brain doesn't naturally do is add in the property taxes, the insurance, the maintenance, the HOA, the opportunity cost of your down payment sitting in home equity instead of compounding in the market, and the transaction costs you'll eventually eat on the way out. Those costs are diffuse, irregular, and easy to discount. The monthly payment is concrete and right in front of you. There's also the cultural anchor. The National Association of Realtors loves to point out that the median net worth of homeowners is around $430,000 versus about $10,000 for renters, a 43-to-1 ratio. That number is real, and it's also misleading because it doesn't account for income, age, or what the renter did with the money they didn't spend on a down payment. It compares two groups that are not the same people. But when you hear that stat at a family dinner, you don't run a regression. You hear, renters are poor, owners are rich, don't be poor. The combination of these two anchors, the monthly payment that looks manageable, and the cultural story that says owning equals wealth, pushes rational people into a transaction the math doesn't support. You're not making a bad choice because you're financially illiterate. You're making it because the framing was engineered over decades to point in one direction. So back to you on the edge of the bed, Zillow still open, mortgage calculator still mocking you. Here's the plain takeaway. If you're planning to stay put for less than 7 years, if your local price-to-rent ratio is above 20, and if the all-in cost of owning is more than a few $100s above comparable rent, the financially honest move is probably to keep renting and invest the difference consistently. Not occasionally, consistently. That last part is the catch. The strategy only works if the money you save actually gets invested, not absorbed into lifestyle creep. You are not failing because you haven't bought a house yet. The target moved. The mortgage rate doubled, the prices climbed 33%, the insurance went up, the tax benefits got trimmed, and nobody updated the script your parents and your co-workers and your social media feed are still reading from. You're a rational person looking at irrational numbers and noticing they don't add up. That's not a personal failing, that's literacy. Buy when the math works, rent when it doesn't. Ignore the bumper sticker. If this helped you see the decision more clearly, hit like, subscribe, and we'll see you in the next one. This has been Rocket Finance.